Okay, Lord Byron. George Gordon, Lord Byron. Very interesting, very outgoing, very flamboyant personality. He stood out. I mean, if you can't tell by looking at that picture, he was a lot different than a lot of people. His back history and such isn't necessarily testable stuff, but yet, look, I mean, it just really shows you how against the grain he was. We even saw Wordsworth, even though he seemed very dignified and such, he was against the grain with regards to his beliefs and his practices in the literary world. And so we see this kind of era of rebelliousness and such. They say that, they call him the most colorful figure of his day. He was born with a club foot, which caused him some embarrassment early on, but he was able to overcome it. So he wasn't one to sit back on his limits. He was able to still push it, and he was accomplished in many activities and sports. The literary celebrity down at the bottom, it had spoken that he was a, kind of born into, not necessarily nobility like a monarch or anything, but he was born into his title. He didn't do anything to achieve it, okay? And he was an individual that, probably was a bit of a celebrity to some degree. He had the money. He was flaunting it. It said that he got in trouble because he had a lot of love affairs going on. He kind of ran out his welcome. And then all of a sudden he becomes a literary relevance. So people actually think, wow, you actually contribute something instead of you're famous for being famous. Kind of like some people we might be able to mention, celebrity-wise. And so then he finally gets some fame, gets some popularity. And he does a lot of good with it, we see. Besides kind of exiling himself from England, things weren't going too well, so he leaves and he travels and stays with the Shelleys. It talks about Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, and we'll talk about Percy Shelley later this unit. So he traveled around. I mean, one of the most interesting features in this is, one, how he died really young, just from flu. But when he died, what was he doing? Well, he was down in Greece training their soldiers, helping them for their rebellion. This is an individual who was not Greek, okay? But he was there because he was championing their cause, and he supported them. And so he was helping them fight and preparing them for revolution and preparing them for their battle. And so we have this individual, who was a celebrity of his era, probably more so than a lot of the individuals that we read. And you can see when it talks about that he was, his life as well as his literary accomplishments, were, modeled after by, Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Dostoevsky, Herman Melville, all of these famous literary works of, later in the 1800s and then, and on, a very, very key and integral person. There's a term called Byronic hero. If you flip to 848 really quick. Byronic hero is kind of associated to him, okay, with his name Byron and such. But this is an individual who, if you look at the bullet points, is rebellious, feels alienated about something, is a very bold and very dangerous individual, okay? If you look in the right-hand page, and I want you to read this page when you have time, people like James Dean, those people who lived and played hard and, were brilliant at whatever they did, but they died young. It was kind of like a tragic type thing. People said in the last handful of years, Heath Ledger, it would have been something similar. He was a bold person. He was rebellious, in nature and such. And, he had kind of a tragic end there. And a lot of times when the tragedy is somebody who is young and had some sort of accomplishments, literary or, in the world to some degree, that those individuals are, Byronic to some degree. So we see those qualities and characteristics portrayed in that individual. Back to his reading on 845 from Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Okay, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Building background says that this is to suggest the character's inner nobility and his quest for meaning. Sick of society, Harold embarks on a series of journeys across Europe only to encounter more disillusionment in the wake of the Napoleonic War. So Napoleon, you see the root word in there. But this particular piece is very short. Look at the title of it. Okay, right below the subtitle, and this is from a larger work, but it's called Apostrophe to the Ocean. And if you remember apostrophes, that's when you are directing a statement towards something that cannot reciprocate it. Remember when we did the poems and such? Oh moon, oh sleep, you know, things of that nature. You don't expect to be to have a conversation. You're just talking to that individual or thing, okay, or idea, I guess it could be, like sleep. And so this one is directed towards the ocean, okay. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, apostrophe to the ocean.
From Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by George Gordon, Lord Byron. Apostrophe to the ocean. There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes, by the deep sea, and music in its roar. I love not man the less, but nature more. From these our interviews in which I steal from all I may be or have been before, to mingle with the universe, and feel what I can ne'er express, yet cannot all conceal. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man marks the earth with ruin, his control stops with the shore. Upon the watery plain, the wrecks are all thy deed, nor doth remain a shadow of man's ravage, save his own, when for a moment, like a drop of rain, he sinks into thy depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. His steps are not upon thy paths, thy fields are not a spoil for him. Thou dost arise and shake him from thee, the vile strength he wields, for earth's destruction thou dost all despise, spurning him from thy bosom to the skies, and sendest him shivering in thy playful spray, and howling to his gods, where haply lies his petty hope in some near port or bay, and dashest him again to earth, there let him lay. The armaments which thunderstrike the walls of rock-built cities, bidding nations quake, and monarchs tremble in their capitals. The oak leviathans, whose huge ribs make their clay creator the vain title take of Lord of thee and Arbiter of war. These are thy toys, and as the snowy flake, they melt into thy yeast of waves, which mar alike the Armada's pride or spoils of Trafalgar. Thy shores are empires, changed in all save thee. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, what are they? Thy waters washed them power while they were free, and many a tyrant since their shores obey the stranger, slave, or savage their decay, has dried up realms to deserts, not so thou, unchangeable, save to thy wild waves play. Time writes no wrinkle on thine azure brow, such as creation's dawn beheld, thou rollest now. Thou glorious mirror, where the Almighty's form glasses itself in tempests in all time, calm or convulsed in breeze or gale or storm, icing the pole or in the torrid clime, dark heaving, boundless, endless, and sublime. The image of eternity, the throne of the invisible, even from out thy slime, the monsters of the deep are made, each zone obeys thee, thou goest forth, dread, fathomless, alone. And I have loved thee, ocean, and my joy of youthful sports was on thy breast to be, borne like thy bubbles onward from a boy. I wantoned with thy breakers, they to me were a delight, and if the freshening sea made them a terror, 'twas a pleasing fear. For I was as it were a child of thee, and trusted to thy billows far and near, and laid my hand upon thy mane, as I do here.
From Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, apostrophe the ocean, he is addressing the ocean, the water, about how big and how timeless thou art. You know, he mentioned on the next page, and we'll get there, you know, about how the ships like oak leviathans. You know, Leviathan is, have you seen Atlantis? Do you remember the cartoon movie Atlantis? The Leviathan was the thing that protects it. So a big, monstrous thing. And so these ships that are like oak leviathans are really just like toys. And if you think about it, I mean, just the sheer size of that water and those waves, what they can do. You know, there are aircraft carriers that are like cities, floating cities with tens of thousands of people, I imagine. I don't know. Definitely thousands of sailors. Okay, but they land and they move around and they have food and things like that on there. I mean, it's a self-sustaining city, in essence. And a storm can just mess that thing all up. If there's a hurricane coming, that ship heads the other way, tries to get around it. Okay, because it would turn it into like a toy in a bathtub. When you guys used to have, little toys, and they used to, it's small. In the grand scheme of things, the biggest boat ever made is still pretty small. Look what happens to, Titanic with nature and such. That was the biggest boat ever constructed, and it didn't even make it through its first voyage. The 100-year anniversary is coming up here next month of the sinking? Maybe not. They're re-releasing the movie in IMAX and stuff, 3D, so that's just for you. A little bit of extra stuff for today. But the apostrophe on page 845, he's very pleased with the ocean. He loves the ocean, talking about, there is, pleasure and rapture in this, and I love not man the less, but I love nature more. But I love nature more. And think back, we've talked about this a lot in this particular unit, about all of these nature elements. Okay, nature and the nightmares and kids, all of those things that influence writing. And here we have another individual as to why this particular piece is a good representation of that era. Man marks the earth. I like this line, 10, 12, around there. Man marks the earth with ruin. His control stops with the shore. So on earth, man can just ruin and war and all of this stuff. And outside of pollution now and all of that stuff, the man's ruin, it stops at the shore. Okay, because whether it's 1,000,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or 2 years ago, we can go out, 30 feet into the water and look straight out to the water, and it's the same view that we would have had 1,000,000 years ago. Okay? Yes, we can look at oil platforms now if we're looking in the exact rights, but you get my point. Okay? Man ceases to be able to control that. Okay? There are people that say, we've spent more time at the bottom of the ocean, or less time at the bottom of the ocean, than we have in space. Meaning that we've explored space more than we have the fathoms of the ocean, and that's here on Earth. There are worlds down there that, there are mountain ranges bigger than Mount Everest underwater. Were you aware of that? I mean, that's just the scope and size of what's out there. Okay? And just a little boat out there, that could do a lot of damage. Okay? A lot of damage could be thrust upon that. And really that's kind of what he's talking about, the rest of this, about the sheer size of it, the ships and man, and how nature trumps all of that. I like the line 44, time writes no wrinkle on thine azure brow. So like with humans and a lot of even animals and such, that people age, and you can tell their age by looking at them. With the ocean, it just keeps going. 1,000 years from now, there's still, unless we have some huge crazy something happens and the moon blows up, we're going to have waves coming in, and the sound will be identical. In conclusion, at the very end, he comes back from talking about all of the size and his love for nature and sums it back that, and I have loved the ocean. So just in case you forgot throughout these short 2 pages to whom he was speaking or addressing, we see once again that it is nature. And don't forget what an apostrophe is. Okay? Remember I told you when we learned it that, hey, you're going to need to remember this, and people tend to forget for some strange reason, even though it's extremely easy to spot. Okay?